Hello my friends, this is another astrological voyages show and I hope you are going to like it. Today we are going to talk about this virus, the COVID-19, and how it is affecting our life, the astrology behind pandemics, but also we are going to talk with a very serious way of how we can deal with fear, how we can deal with anxiety, with stress, because all of these things are very stressful. Usually people that have already a psychological disorder do not feel really well, and we are usually under threat. So we are going to discuss all of this stuff this time, and we're going to communicate. So if you don't feel really well, if you want to share your message, if you want to share your point of view, I will be more than grateful to see your opinion, how you see this pandemic, how this pandemic really works within astrology. I would like to hear your voice and understand your point of view and your astrology. Even if you are not a professional, sometimes you may know better than a professional, so try and give us your information, your point of view, and I think this is always very fascinating. So I would like first to start with the basic aspects of what really happens with the pandemic, and of course I'm going to start with the Black Death during the medieval ages. If you don't know, the Black Death came from Crimea, a region in Russia, and in modern day Ukraine, that it is under the rule of Russia because Russia attacked this specific region and now has it with weapons. So the Genoese ships came from Haifa, from that region, and then passed from Istanbul, what we called then in those days Constantinople, in the Eastern Roman Empire, and there was this huge disaster of what we call the Black Death. If we look in about Black Death, we are going to see that we had Pluto having a conjunction with Uranus in the sign of Aries, and also we had this Saturn having a conjunction with Jupiter. What I found really interesting, and I would like also your point of view, is that if we look at the epidemics of the recent century, there is always not just a Saturn-Pluto conjunction square or an opposition, but we usually have some kind of a conjunction or an aspect between Jupiter and Pluto, something which I think is really important to look at it. And if you look later, when the pandemic really took over Europe, it was in 1349. Then we had a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in the sign of Aries. So in China and in Asia, the Black Death started in 1345 AD, and we had Pluto-Uranus having a conjunction in Aries, and also we had Saturn and Jupiter having a conjunction in Aquarius. On the other hand, when Black Death took all over Europe, and we had 1/3 of the population unfortunately dead, we had this Saturn having a conjunction with Pluto in sign of Aries. So this is a first moment of how things usually affect us and how things usually can show us what really happens. And then if we look at the First World War around 1914 and 1918, we can see that this happens because we had this Saturn-Pluto also conjunction. We had already a conjunction in the First World War that started the problem in the region, and then everything collapsed. And also we had the Spanish flu and a little threat about cholera. We had also cholera around this region, and Spanish flu was around 1918 and 1920, and it was, I think, because of Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is also very powerful conjunction when we talk about pandemics. And of course in 1921, 1923, when we had the first square of the cycle of Saturn and Pluto, we had the fascism, and we had all of this era of people holding the power and starting to make the nations believe in them, like Hitler or Mussolini. And of course, in the 1930s, we had the great financial crisis, which a lot of people talk about. Neptune was playing part of it, Uranus was playing part of it, but also it was a huge part of it, the opposition between Saturn and Pluto, which is, I think, a critical cycle if we really want to understand the bad events that happens, especially in the last century in the world. And then we have, of course, the World War II. And in the World War II, we had a square between Saturn and Neptune, but also afterwards, on the end of the World War II, we had another problem, the Cold War, that led several disasters to many nations. For example, in Greece, Greeks were fighting Greeks because we had the right Greeks and the left Greeks, and we had a civil war in Greece. So we had several events that happened with this square. And of course, afterwards, we have the Asian flu around 1957 and 1958. And I think that it is also this influenced by a square between Saturn and Pluto. And of course, we have in 1982 the AIDS epidemic, that so many people, they had so much fear about everything. What I think is really important is that, for example, in the 1920s that we had the Spanish flu, the conjunction and the planetary composition was in Cancer, so was about younger people. On the other hand, if we look at this conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn, we can see that this conjunction is about an influenza, about a virus that hits older people, and Capricorn is about older people. It is ruled by Saturn and has to do with older age. And that for me was really fascinating to look at it and finding this connection. And of course, I think that what is really important is that if we look even smaller problems like the 2001 Twin Tower that unfortunately fell in New York, and the terrorist attack, I mean, and of course in 2003 the SARS virus, and afterwards in 2020 now we have this specific coronavirus. It's all about Saturn and Pluto. Everywhere we can look Saturn and Pluto, but also we can look about Jupiter and Pluto, which I found it really interesting, because you couldn't believe that Jupiter Pluto is about epidemic. But what I believe is that when Jupiter and Pluto are as a cycle connected with Saturn Neptune or Saturn Pluto, this mostly is about how an epidemic can also influence our financial system. Those that were looking our shows before 2020, we talked about some problematic situations in worldwide economy, and also we talk about a problematic situation that perhaps had to do with the virus. And the only problem was I'm sorry. The only problem was that we had to connect two different things that we couldn't really imagine what would really happen. But that happened exactly as we could expect it. First, we had the influenza, we had this virus, and then we had the problem with the financial situation. And I think this is really important, because this specific epidemic is affecting heavily our financial system, and we know that our financial system is not well, and I think this is going to be the biggest problem afterwards. For people asking me my personal point of view when we are going to end with this virus, I think this is going to take for a year. Perhaps in summer that we have some eclipses, we may have some other problems in our financial situations, or we may have some problematic events between people or between states. So we may have some wars or even some devastating events with our environment, like fires. But I think that virus is going to come back with Mars going retrograde on the 3rd decade of Aries, and this Mars going retrograde in the 3rd decade of Aries is going to bring back all of this energy that really happens now in the 3rd decade of Capricorn that we have already talked about in the previous show that I have done in the previous Monday. What I think is really important, and we have to look closer, is that I think this is a period that we need to redefine our economy and how our system works. And don't forget that we have also Saturn in Aquarius. I'm going to talk about it in the next show because all of these events were really important and we have to talk about it in this show. But in the next show I'm going to speak about Saturn entering the sign of Aquarius. And I think that Saturn in Aquarius is about controlling groups and about being in fear. So if I'm living in fear, I'm going to give my rights to you in order to protect me. And this is what is going to happen in whatever republic and democracy you live in, or even worse, if you live in a non-democratic state, which is, I think, really important to understand that the next years are really difficult, because we really need to change the way we understand the astrological cycles. I don't believe that 2020 is the end. I think that we have around 2 with 3 or even 4 years in front of us that we need to look closer about what really happens and how we can save our financial system, or if we cannot save our financial system, how we can redefine it and change it and perhaps find solutions, because the main problem is that financial situation in every country is going to get worse. Things are going really to go rapidly in a very, very negative way, not just in European Union, but also in United States. I said previously that this Saturn-Pluto conjunction was affecting mostly United States, and it is on the midheaven, the conjunction of New York. The line in astrogeography passes through New York, and New York is United States. So I think that we're going to have also some problems in United States, but also a lot of problems in what we call in the Southeast Asia. And the main problem for me is that we didn't yet recovered from 2008 crisis. And of course, if you speak about Greece, we didn't recover from this decade of crisis in our economy. So I think this is going to be really big, and we don't understand yet the consequences of what really happens right now. But also I think that this is the first time that we are going to talk about biochemical war and how perhaps states, I'm not saying that this specific virus is a weapon of a specific state. I'm not going to go to this road. Perhaps it is, perhaps it's not. But it is the first time that we are using, through modern technological standards, a pandemic in order to hurt another state, which is, I think, really important to understand that this is going to be a real financial war against each other. Europe with the United States with Southeast Asia and China, and all of these things are going to get some real trouble in the next years. So I think we are in a very interesting point in history, because the next 4 years are going to be really fascinating, and they are going to change the way we understand the word and we understand the concept of being free, which is, I think, what we are going to lose in the next years, our freedom. I think that the main problem is that specific fears that are going to be used by the states, I mean the countries in the world, not the United States, to control us and do not let us feel free, in order to protect us, of course, by various dangers, which is something that is going to be even worse if we were going to talk about countries in Asia, for example. And if we go and look the first patient, and I think that was really important, the first patient, a lot of people say that was around the 17th of November 2019. And if we look at the first patient, of course, we are going to see that we have this conjunction of Saturn and Pluto. It is about 5 degrees orb, but I think it works. Everything that it is closer of 10 degrees in planetary cycles, or even within the same sign, I think it works. And a lot of astrologers, I think, also agree with me. Also, we have a very out of sign aspect opposition between Uranus and Mars, and also we are having Neptune that is having this sextile with Saturn, but also we have Jupiter being in Sagittarius and forming a sextile with Mars. So looking at the chart of the first patient, I think that this virus is not so dangerous. Yes, it is affecting people. We have to be very careful. You should protect the older people around you because it's very life-threatening to the ages, I think, 70 plus, and you have really to be careful. But I think that the virus itself is not so big, at least for the most of the people and the most of the population. But if we look closer, we are going to see that Venus was out of orb and was out of bounds in Sagittarius, and also Moon, it was very close going out of bounds too. And what I think is the most important, looking at this chart, which is, I think, the most fascinating, is that we are having a lot of planetary positions that they are saying to us that something really happens, and it's not very good. We can see that we have this Mars-Uranus contra-parallel, and we can see, as I said, Venus going out of bounds, Jupiter having a contra-parallel with Moon and South Node. I think South Node is always about the people, about the community, and at the same time we have an exact parallel between Pluto and Saturn, which is why I'm always saying that look on declinations. Declinations is a very useful tool. Saturn and Pluto were in an exact parallel during this period of time around the 17th of November 2019, and I think that so to us the danger of what will happen. Also, we have a great midpoint around this period. We have the Sun being on the midpoint of Mars and Neptune, which has to do with epidemics and has to do with viruses, and also we have an aspect between Neptune and Mars, which is, I think, really important, and around 2 degrees and 22. But not just that. If we look closer, we have Mars being on the midpoint of Uranus and Pluto, and Pluto, as I said, was forming also an aspect with Neptune. Saturn also was forming an aspect with Neptune. So we have a lot of very interesting secret aspects that they tell us a story about the crisis that was going to happen in the next month. And I think that if we look closer of what will really happen is that we had in the 26th of December 2018 this eclipse on the 4th degree of Capricorn, which a lot of people saw it like something very easy, but we show that it wasn't. But don't forget that everything gets critical after 11th of January 2020, after the second eclipse that happened in the 20th of Cancer, that was in a direct opposition with Pluto and Saturn and all of this stuff that we said that was really dangerous. And I think that this showed everything and gave us a lot of information. But if we look also in some star aspects, Sun was in conjunction with Agena, which is always about pain. It is about learning some very painful things about what really happens in our life, but also has to do with learning. So I think that this virus is a learning experience. But if we look at in a scientific and in an evolutionary way, every virus, every pandemic gives us the opportunity to become better as human beings, because we adapt and we become even stronger against anything else, something that I think is really interesting. But also Jupiter is in conjunction with Hercules, and fixed star that has to do with attacks, has to do with very, very dangerous situations that may have success but has also to do with attacks, which is, I think, also something really interesting if we look at the fixed stars. But the main aspects around this period was this Saturn and Neptune, and when we had, now we are having this Jupiter and Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, this is going to be big. That's why I believe that in the next 2 months we are going to have even worse situations. But we should not get panic, we should not fear, we should believe that things are going to get better if we really try to protect ourselves and especially our beloved ones. So if you are close to people that are of old age, it will be better to protect them and try to avoid any kind of contact with them. So I think that we are in the middle of this crisis, and around at the end of April, perhaps in the beginning of May, we are going to take a deep breath and take the lead and have some fun, although this summer is going to be very negative between the relationships of various countries, and we may have some severe hostilities or very extreme dangers like fires in the forests and for example disasters, which is, I think, 2020 is about learning how fragile is our life and how we can really understand that if we cannot communicate as humanity and combine our forces, we cannot survive. I think that this is about learning about the collective. We are always about Christus, myself, but Christus is important, Jessica is important, Mario is important. We are very, very focused on ourselves, and we forget that we are also part of something greater, of what we call a humanity, or even more what we call Earth and what inhabits in this specific planet, which is, I think, the basic lesson of what we should understand and change in our life from now on. But I think that I talked enough. I don't want you to leave you in terror or feeling bad. The next thing I'm going to talk about, and it's not about astrology, is about stress and how we can cope with all of these fears. I spoke before some hours also to the Greek audience, which is, I think, very important, because we really need to understand that we can cope with stress and we can manage all this anxiety and these stressful situations. I think that we should look closer to children and teenagers, because they are going to feel really bad, and you cannot isolate a teenager so easily, because he is going or she is going to feel suffocate. Also, you have to look closer to older people and people with chronic diseases, because they are going to feel that they are at risk and their anxiety levels are going to be even higher. You have to try to make them feel relaxed. You have to talk to them, and of course it is about try to help them. And if you have any person that has any kind of a mental health condition, you should also speak with those people and try to give them some love and interest and give them some supportive emotions, because I think it is the most important. Of course, in whatever country you are, try to call if you're overwhelmed or feel really bad about this situation, and try to communicate with a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a counselor, because you are a person and you can be fragile and you can be weak sometimes. It is not bad to be weak, even if you are a parent, because usually parents take all of this and they have to handle all of this pressure, and sometimes you cannot speak loud and you cannot open what really happens. And that is even more important if you belong to a minority in Europe or in United States, because usually minorities, you really try to be harder for yourself in order to sustain all this pressure, and you deny that you are in some kind of stressful situation or even crisis, and you should look even closer to your emotions and do not feel bad about not be able to handle all of this. And of course you should do things in order to react to this amount of stressful pressure in yourself. First of all, you should always try to understand what yourself saying. If you are having change in your sleep or in your eating patterns, if you are having problems like chronic health problems and they are worsening, if you are using substances that they are not very useful for you, like alcohol, tobacco or any other substances, try to stop it, because they are going to bring the situation in even worse. And also try to sleep if you have difficulty in sleeping, or try to focus in your job and in other things. And of course try to stop fear about everything. And sometimes I think the most important is that you should just change the channel that says all of these things and just have fun. Try and communicate with your beloved ones. Try and hug someone within your family, of course, not outside your house. And try to be polite and communicate and play and have some great conversation with people. Right now we have the internet, we have the social media. Try to communicate with as many ways as you can, and also try to support yourself but also support others. I think that you have first to do some activities that you may enjoy, because they are very important. It is very important to do things that you are enjoying, and also connect with other people, something that I think is always very interesting. Also try to read something that hasn't to do with this pandemic and this virus. Try to read a romantic story, a funny story, see a comedy, watch something that is going to bring you some joy, and always exercise, take care of your meals and your nutrition, and also try to move as much as you can, because moving our bodies, it is something that is going to bring us joy and is going to help us a lot. And what I think is really important then is that if you have older people or a child in the family, you should always try to be there and try to protect them from this excessive worriness, or you may find irritability, or sometimes they may have some avoidance to communicate. And I think the best way to do that is that to talk and tell them that they can protect themselves and that you are going to protect them too. And of course try to make something like a creative routine, like having some activities and have some fun, and forget all of this negative stuff, and not limiting yourself around this threat that is going to bring death everywhere, because sometimes we're maximizing things because of fear and we are losing are grown with other people and with the situation, but most of all with the reality. And also try to show your love and try to show them that you are really interested in them. And I think this is the most important. Of course, if you have already this virus, you may have some kind of a shock, you may have some kind of trauma, because this is the unknown. You are having something within your body that is threatening yourself, and this is always very anxious, especially when it is when it has a very problematic features like high fever and problems with the lungs. So also try to get out from all of this negative situation. Follow what your doctor says and protect yourselves after you get well from all of this stuff, because this is a traumatic situation. And even if you get well very soon, you're going to get well very soon if you have it, you are going to feel this traumatic situation in your life for some days or even months. So try to stop following all of this stuff about this virus and just get out and try to feel as much as fun and have the best outcome and the best activities for you. The same of course happens for people that are in quarantine, because also you may have people that they are in a quarantine, and if you are in a quarantine you are going also to feel that pressure. Astrologically speaking, Mercury has to do with anxiety, so you have a heavily influenced, very powerful or a very weak Mercury. For example, a Mercury that it is in Gemini or Virgo or in Sagittarius and Pisces. If you have a Mercury having very bad aspects like several opposition and squares, you should be careful, because you may be in danger of having some kind of a stressful situation. You cannot cope with stress, so stop feeling the fear and try to communicate better with the others. And the most important is that try to listen to your body, but do not be overwhelmed by the fear, and try to understand every signal that your body is sending, because you are going to get panicked, because you are going to say, oh, I have that and I have that and I have that. Try to relax. Nothing is going to go wrong if you protect yourself and the others and you follow the doctors and what they are saying. And I think that except of Mercury, you should look if the ruler of the first, of the third and of the ninth house are very important to understand if someone is in an anxiety situation. So you have to look closer in the rulers of this house, if they are heavily aspected or if they are having some really bad signs. For example, the ruler of Venus, the ruler of the third may be Venus, and Venus be in Virgo. This is not really well for you, so you are prone to negative criticism and thinking that everything are going to get worse, so you may overreacting, so that may bring some stressful situation in your life and stressful thinking, and this anxiety may be overwhelming. So try to understand your natal chart. Do not bind to your natal chart. Understand your natal chart and be free. And as I said months before, this Saturn-Pluto conjunction is about fear. Do not let the trap of fear overwhelm you. You can do it. You are strong. You are powerful. You are a clever human, and you can protect yourself and you can be fine. Thank you very much, my dear friends, for your time. This was another astrological voyage, so thank you for attending me, and we are going again to be together in 1 week. Bye bye, and try to give as much as possible love to you and your beloved ones. Thank you.